There's a place where the world grows quiet, where clouds settle into valleys like blankets, and the wind carries stories older than memory. If you close your eyes now, you can almost feel it, the cool mountain air of the Andes, thin and crisp, filling your lungs with the scent of wild grass and ancient stone. Tonight, we journey backward through time, to an empire that stretched across the spine of South America like a giant staircase. The Inca civilization, a world of terraced fields, stone cities, and roads that climbed into the clouds. But this is not a story of emperors or gold. This is a story about hands. Ordinary hands. Hands that twisted grass into rope. Hands that wove bridges across impossible chasms. Hands that kept an empire breathing, one thread at a time. Imagine standing at the edge of a canyon in the year 1450. Below you, a river roars white water tumbling over black rocks, its voice echoing off sheer cliffs that drop away into mist. On the other side, barely visible through the haze, another cliff, equally impossible, equally distant. Between these two walls of stone, suspended hundreds of feet above the churning water, hangs a bridge made entirely of grass rope. It sways gently in the wind. It creaks. It looks impossibly fragile. And yet people cross it daily, farmers with llamas, messengers carrying government orders, families moving between villages. They trust this bridge with their lives because they trust the people who made it. The weavers, the rope makers, the unsung engineers of the Andes. These were not architects celebrated in royal courts. Their names were not carved into temple walls. They were villagers, men and women, who understood grass the way sailors understand wind. They knew which stalks to cut, which season to harvest, how many twists would give a cord its strength. They knew the sound a good rope makes when you pull it taut. They knew, without measuring tools or written formulas, exactly how much weight a bridge could hold. Their work was vital. Without these bridges, the Inca Empire could not have existed. The roads would have ended at every canyon. Messages would never have reached distant provinces. Armies could not have moved. Trade would have stalled. The empire would have been a collection of isolated valleys, unable to function as a unified whole. And yet, when we think of ancient marvels, we rarely think of rope. We think of Machu Picchu's stone walls, fitted so precisely that even today you cannot slide a knife blade between them. We think of gold masks and elaborate temples. We think of the grand and the permanent. But the Inca knew something we often forget. The most important technologies are often the most humble. The most essential workers are often the least celebrated. Tonight, we will walk slowly through their world. We will feel the mountain grass between our fingers. We will watch communities gather to rebuild a bridge, their voices rising in song as they work. We will stand at the canyon's edge and understand, perhaps for the first time, what it meant to trust something woven by hand. This is not a story that demands your attention. It is a story that invites you to rest. To let the rhythm of ancient labor lull you into peaceful sleep, because sometimes the most soothing stories are the ones about work steady, patient, unnoticed work that holds the world together. So settle in, breathe slowly. Let your mind wander into the high Andes where the air is clear and the grass grows tough on rocky slopes. Let yourself imagine a time when the most important technology in the world was something you could hold in your hands. Something made of nothing more than grass and skill and time. The weavers are waiting. The bridges are calling. And the past is ready to welcome you into its quiet embrace. Let us begin. To understand the bridges, we must first understand the roads. And to understand the roads, we must appreciate the sheer audacity of what the Inca accomplished. Imagine trying to build a transportation network across terrain specifically designed to prevent travel. Mountains that scrape the sky. Deserts so dry that rivers exist only as memories in ancient stone. Jungles where humidity turns metal to rust and wood to rot. Valleys separated by vertical cliffs. Rivers that swell with snowmelt, turning from streams to torrents in a single afternoon. Now imagine building roads through all of this. Not simple paths worn by foot traffic, but engineered, roads paved, drained, maintained, marked with rest stops and checkpoints. Roads that could handle llama trains carrying hundreds of pounds of goods. Roads that military forces could march along, even during the rainy season. Roads that connected the capital city of Cusco to provinces thousands of miles away, from modern-day Colombia down to central Chile. This was the Capac. It's on the Great Inca Road, more than 25,000 miles of interconnected pathways, making it one of the most extensive transportation networks in the ancient world. To put that in perspective, the Roman road system at its height, it's covered about 250,000 miles, but served a much flatter, more accommodating landscape. The Inca roads climbed, they descended, they tunneled, they bridged. They conquered geography that would make modern civil engineers pause and recalculate. There were two main arteries. The coastal route ran parallel to the Pacific Ocean, connecting fishing villages and agricultural valleys through the arid western lowlands. It was the easier path, where temperatures stayed moderate and terrain stayed relatively flat. But it was also limited. You could travel quickly, but you couldn't reach the heart of the empire. The highland route was the true marvel. This road climbed into the Andes proper, winding through passes over 16,000 feet above sea level, where the air grows so thin that newcomers gasp with every step. It crossed high plateaus where llama herds grazed on tough grasses, where nights could freeze even in summer. It descended into cloud forests where orchids bloomed in trees and spectacled bears foraged for fruit. Connecting these two main routes were hundreds of smaller roads, lateral connections that tied the empire together like stitching on fabric. And wherever these roads encountered obstacles too great to walk around, rivers too wide to ford, canyons too deep to descend, the Inca built bridges. Wooden bridges spanned smaller streams. Stone bridges arched over moderate rivers. Floating reed bridges made from totora plants crossed lake channels. But for the truly impossible crossings, the places where solid ground simply ended and then resumed hundreds of feet away, separated by nothing but air and falling water, the Inca turned to their most innovative solution: suspension bridges made entirely of grass rope. These were not decorative features. They were critical infrastructure. Without them, the roads ended. With them, the roads continued. They were the joints in the empire's skeleton, the hinges that allowed movement where movement should have been impossible. Consider the bridge at Apurimac, one of the most famous crossings in the entire empire. The Apurimac River, whose name means the Great Speaker in Quechua, named for its constant roar cuts, a gorge so deep and narrow that standing at the top feels like standing at the edge of the earth itself. The river below appears as a thin white thread, though you can hear its thunder vibrating through the stone beneath your feet. The Inca spanned this abyss with a rope, bridge nearly 150 feet long. It swayed with the wind. It bounced under the weight of travelers. And yet it stood year after year. It's maintained by local communities who understood that their bridge was not just a local convenience. It was a vital organ in the empire's body. If this bridge failed, messages from the northern provinces would be delayed by weeks. Military reinforcements could not reach troubled regions. Trade goods would pile up on both sides of the canyon. Unable to proceed, the same was true at dozens of other crossing points throughout the empire. The bridge at Pampas, the bridge at Curahuasi, the countless unnamed bridges that carried traffic over smaller but still impassable gorges. Each one was unique, adapted to its specific location, longer or shorter, higher or lower, anchored to different types of rock, maintained by different communities, and each one represented something remarkable, not just engineering skill, but social organization. Because unlike stone bridges, which could last for generations once built, grass rope bridges deteriorated constantly. The sun dried the fibers, rain soaked them, wind frayed them, weight stretched them. A rope bridge was not a permanent installation. It was a living structure that required continuous attention, periodic repair, the incomplete renewal every single year. This meant that bridge maintenance became woven into the rhythm of empire. It was part of the Mita system, the Inca's method of taxation through labor. Instead of paying money which didn't exist in their economy, citizens contributed time and work to state projects. You might spend 1 month building terraces, another month serving in the army, Another month, weaving a bridge. This system only worked because of organization. The Inca kept detailed records not in writing as they had no written language, but in quipu. Intricate systems of knotted strings that recorded numbers, dates, and other information. Officials tracked which communities were responsible for which bridges. They scheduled renewal ceremonies. They monitored rope quality. They ensured that knowledge passed from generation to generation, so that the bridges never failed. The roads, in this sense, were more than physical structures. They were proof of the empire's ability to coordinate human effort across vast distances and diverse populations. They demonstrated that the Inca had mastered not just the technical challenge of crossing rivers and canyons, but the far more difficult challenge of organizing thousands of people to maintain those crossings. Year after year, generation after generation, at night. Along these roads, fires would burn at tambos way stations placed at regular intervals where travelers could rest, eat, and sleep. If you were a Chaskia relay messenger, you might run your leg of a route carrying urgent news. Knowing another runner waited at the next tambo to take the message onward, information could travel from Quito to Cusco, a distance of over 1,000 miles, less than a week faster than most communications in medieval Europe. But none of this would have been possible without the bridges. And the bridges would not have been possible without the weavers. The empire's roads stretched across deserts and mountains, but they only truly connected the land because ordinary people working with grass and their own hands built the crossings that held everything together. As you drift towards sleep tonight, imagine looking down on the Andes from above a god's eye view. You'd see the roads threading through impossible terrain like veins through a body. And at the crucial points, you would see the bridges. Small, seemingly fragile threads spanning great voids. And if you looked closely enough, you might see the workers' tiny figures gathering on both sides of a canyon, preparing to weave the next generation of connection between their world and ours. Let us pause at the edge of the canyon and simply look. There is no hurry here. Time moves differently in these mountains. A moment can stretch into an hour. An hour can compress into a breath. The Andes are old. Not just old in the way a building or a tree is old, but old in the way the earth itself is old. These mountains began forming over 200 million years ago. When the Nazca tectonic plate began sliding beneath the South American plate, crumpling the edge of the continent like fabric pushed across a table, volcanoes erupted. Peaks thrust upward. The land folded and buckled and rose, slowly, inexorably, until it became the longest continental mountain range in the world, 4,300 miles from north to south. A barrier and a highway, a challenge and a home. What makes the Andes particularly dramatic is not just their height. Though many peaks exceed 20,000 feet, it is the way they drop. In some places, you can stand on relatively flat, ground-to-high plateau. Perhaps where grass grows and llamas graze, and then, without warning, the land simply ends. It doesn't slope gently downward. It doesn't gradually transition. It ends. And hundreds, sometimes thousands of feet below, it begins again. These are not valleys in the gentle sense. They are not the rolling hills of pastoral paintings. They are vertical fractures in the earth, carved by millions of years of water cutting through stone. Rivers that began as snowmelt on high peaks found cracks in the rock, and over millennia, ground those cracks into chasms. The water worked patiently, constantly, wearing away harder stone, exploiting weaknesses, deepening the cuts until entire sections of mountain were separated by what geologists call gorges, but which might be better described as wounds in the landscape. If you were to descend into one of these canyons carefully, slowly, watching every foothold, you would pass through different worlds. At the top, near 14,000 feet, the vegetation is sparse. Tough grasses, low shrubs, plants that have adapted to thin air, intense sun during the day, and freezing temperatures at night. This is the Puna, the high grassland, where the only trees are those small enough to hide from the wind as you descend. Still thousands of feet above the river, you might enter a zone where things green up slightly. Moisture from the canyon traps here, creating microclimates where ferns can grow, where moss covers stones. The temperature rises incrementally with each 100 feet of descent. Your ears pop from the pressure change. The air thickens, becomes easier to breathe. Further down, if the canyon is deep enough, you might reach cloud forest, a magical zone where mist clings to everything, where trees draped in epiphytes create tunnels of green, where moisture drips constantly even when no rain falls. Hummingbirds hover in clearings. The sound of the river grows louder, closer, though you still cannot see it through the vegetation. And finally, at the bottom you find the river itself. Not the peaceful stream you might imagine, but a force of nature. Whitewater crashes over boulders, generating a roar that drowns out all other sound. The spray soaks everything within 50 feet of the banks. The current is impossibly swift. If you fell in, you would be swept away instantly, tumbled over rocks, drowned in seconds. There is no swimming here, there's no waiting. No peaceful contemplation at the water's edge. Now imagine that you need to cross this. That on the other side of this raging torrent, beyond these vertical cliffs, lies your destination. Perhaps it's the next village where your family lives. Perhaps it's a field you need to farm. Perhaps it's the continuation of the road you're traveling. It's carrying a message that must reach the capital before the new moon. The river is too fast to cross directly. Even if you could somehow survive the current, the canyon walls on both sides rise thousands of feet. You would need days to descend on one side, cross if you could find a calm spot, and then days more to climb the other side. By the time you completed this journey, the message you carried would be obsolete. The market would be over. Your family would think you dead. This was the everyday. Ain't reality for people living in the Andes. Geography that would seem impossible to most humans was simply where they lived, where they needed to travel. Where they built their civilization, the Inca understood this landscape intimately. They had lived in these mountains for generations, and the peoples they conquered had lived here even longer. They knew which rivers flooded in spring, which passes closed with winter snow, which valleys offered shelter from wind, which peaks held sacred significance. But knowing the land and being able to move through it are different things. The Inca Empire's genius was not just in adapting to their environment, but in refusing to be limited by it. When they encountered a canyon too deep to cross by normal means, they didn't route their roads around it that might add hundreds of miles to a journey. They didn't abandon the project. They didn't declare that region too difficult to incorporate into the empire. Instead, they built bridges. Impossible bridges. Bridges that, two Spanish conquistadors, seeing them for the first time, seemed like works of magic or madness. Bridges that swayed and creaked and looked as if they would collapse under the weight of a single person, but which somehow held, which somehow lasted, which somehow carried traffic for decades. Even centuries, the Spanish chronicler Pedro de Cisa de Leon, traveling through these regions in the 1540s, wrote with amazement about crossing one such bridge. If a man's heart is not strong, when he sees himself hanging in the air and the river far below, his sense is real. Another conquistador described the experience as terrifying beyond measure, noting that some Spanish horses refused entirely to cross and had to be blindfolded and led. But for the Inca and their subject peoples, these bridges were not terrifying. They were normal, necessary, as ordinary as a paved road or a sturdy wooden bridge would be in other contexts. Children crossed them on their way to help in the fields. Elderly people crossed them to visit relatives. Pregnant women crossed them. Herders drove llamas across them, sometimes dozens at a time. This normalization of the impossible was possible only because of trust. Trust in the materials. Trust in the construction methods. And most of all, trust in the people who built and maintained these structures. The weavers, as the last light fades from the canyon and stars, begin appearing in the narrow strip of sky visible between the cliffs. Consider what it means to trust. To step onto a bridge made of grass, nothing but dried plant fibers, twisted and braided, and walk out over a void that could swallow you whole. To feel the bridge move under your feet, swaying with your weight in the wind, and to keep walking. To hear the river roaring below, and to know that only rope stands between you and that chaos. This trust was not blind faith. It was earned. earned by generations of weavers who did their work so well that the bridges never failed. Earned by communities who took their responsibilities seriously, who understood that lives depended on their skill. Earned by a system that valued reliability over speed, quality over convenience. The canyons of the Andes were obstacles, but they became, through human ingenuity and labor, connections. The very geography that should have divided people instead became the stage for one of their greatest achievements. And as you drift deeper into sleep, let yourself imagine standing on solid ground, looking across to the other side of an impossible gap, and truly knowing that you can cross. Not because the gap has disappeared, but because someone, somewhere, wove a path through the air itself. ... Who were they? The people who made the impossible possible. History often remembers names at the expense of faces. We know the rulers Pachacati, the 9th Sapa Inca, who expanded the empire. Tupac Inca Yupanqui, who extended the borders even further. Huayna Capac, who ruled at the empire's height. Their names survived in chronicles written by Spanish priests, transcribed from oral histories after the conquest. But the bridge weavers left no such records. They were not royalty. They were not priests or generals. They did not live in Cusco's stone palaces or perform ceremonies in golden temples. They lived in small villages scattered throughout the Andes places, whose names have been forgotten, or which exist today only as archaeological sites slowly being reclaimed by mountain grass. They were farmers primarily. People who grew potatoes and quinoa on terrace fields carved into mountainsides. People who kept small herds of llamas and alpacas, using the wool for textiles and the animals themselves for transport and occasionally meat. People whose daily lives revolved around planting and harvest, around maintaining irrigation channels, around the slow rhythm of agricultural work. But they were also part of a larger system. The Midithi Inca labor tax touched every household in the empire. It was how the state accomplished large projects without currency. Need a new temple built? Conscript workers from nearby provinces, each contributing a set amount of labor time. Need a new road? Same system. Need terraces carved into a mountainside to expand agricultural production? Mita. And need bridges maintained. Mita, for the communities living near major canyon crossings, bridge maintenance was their primary Mita obligation. It was not optional. It was not volunteer work. It was a tax, as obligatory as income tax in modern societies. But unlike taxes paid in money, which disappear into abstract government accounts, the Mita labor was immediate and visible. You knew exactly what your work accomplished. You saw the bridge you helped weave. You crossed it. Your family crossed it. Your neighbors crossed it. This created a different relationship to the work. It wasn't just duty, it was also craft, pride, legacy. The weavers were both men and women. This is worth emphasizing, because many accounts of ancient labor focused exclusively on men. But weaving, in Andean culture, was not gendered the way European labor often was. Women wove textiles cloth for clothing, for religious offerings, for trade goods. Men wove ropes for bridges, for construction, for tying loads onto pack animals. Both skills were essential. Both required years to master. A skilled weaver could judge rope quality by touch, could feel the tension in a twisted cord and know whether it would hold under stress, could look at grass and determine whether it had been harvested at the right time, whether it had dried properly, whether it would produce strong fibers or weak ones. This knowledge was not written down. There were no instruction manuals, no engineering specifications, no blueprints. The knowledge lived in hands and eyes and muscle memory. It passed from parent to child, from master to apprentice, through demonstration and practice and correction. No, feel it. Here you're twisting too loosely. The cord needs to bite into itself. See this color? Too green. It's not dry enough yet. It will rot. Listen, hear that sound when you pull it? That's what good rope sounds like. These were the lessons. Simple, direct, repeated until they became instinct. The work was seasonal. Bridges were typically renewed during the dry season, when weather was predictable and materials easier to work with. This meant that bridge construction became part of the annual rhythm, like planting or harvest. Everyone knew that when certain stars appeared in the night sky, it was time to start gathering grass. When the moon reached a certain phase, it was time to begin twisting ropes. When the Inca officials arrived to inspect the old bridge, it was time to gather the entire community for the renewal ceremony. The weavers worked in teams. Bridge construction was not something one person could do alone, or even a small group. It required dozens, sometimes hundreds of people, all working in coordination. Some harvested grass from high slopes. Others dried it, spread in the sun on flat areas near the construction site. Others twisted individual fibers into thin cords. Others braided these cords into thicker ropes. Others still wove these ropes into the massive cables that would form the bridge's main support. And throughout this process, there was leadership. Not kings or nobles, but experts, people whose skill was so well known that others deferred to their judgment. Ask old Tupac's woven 15 bridges in his life. He'll know. These informal leaders directed the work, decided when materials were ready, judged when the bridge was safe to use. It was collective expertise. Distributed knowledge. No single person knew everything, but the community as a whole held all the information necessary to build structures that would carry thousands of people over chasms should have been uncrossable. And they did this year after year, generation after generation. Not because they loved the work, though some certainly did, but because it needed doing. Because the alternative was isolation. Because the bridges were, quite literally, what held their world together. The Spanish, when they arrived, were confused by this system. They understood paid labor. They understood slavery. But the idea of a labor tax that people fulfilled willingly, even proudly, that was foreign. Many Spanish chroniclers assumed the Inca had forced people to build the bridges, that the weavers were slaves or prisoners. But the evidence suggests otherwise. The bridges required too much skill, too much care, too much precision to be built by forced labor. A resentful worker might sabotage a bridge, weaken it deliberately, ensure it failed. The fact that the bridges worked, that they rarely failed catastrophically, suggests that the weavers took their work seriously, that they understood its importance, that they, in some sense, consented to the system even if they could not opt out of it. This is not to romanticize the Mita. It was a tax, and like all taxes, it was a burden. It took time away from personal projects. It was physically demanding. It sometimes pulled people away from their families for weeks at a time, but it was also meaningful. The weavers were not anonymous laborers. They were known. Their work was visible. And in a world without writing, without lasting monuments in stone, the bridges were their legacy. Their children would cross these bridges. Their grandchildren would cross them. Their names might be forgotten, but their work would remain, holding the world together one thread at a time. As sleep begins to pull you under, imagine being one of them. Your hands rough from years of working with cord, your fingers knowing instinctively how much pressure to apply, how tight to twist. Standing with your community at the edge of a canyon, watching the bridge take shape, knowing that your work, your specific hands, your specific skill is part of what will allow life to continue, part of what will allow travelers to cross tomorrow, next month, next year. And feeling, despite the tired muscles and the long hours, a quiet satisfaction. The satisfaction of work done well, of being necessary, of being in the most fundamental way useful. ... Touch is the first sense we develop and often the last to fade. Even as vision blurs and hearing dims with sleep, we can still feel the weight of a blanket, the softness of a pillow, the texture of fabric against skin. So let us understand the bridges through touch. Through the feeling of grass in hand, the Andes grow a particular type of grass. Itu in Quechua, sometimes called stipa itu by botanists, though it encompasses several related species. It is not lush grass, not the soft manicured green of a lawn. It too is tough, almost bristly, with thin blades that grow in dense tufts. It thrives at high altitudes where few other plants survive. Between 12,000 and 16,000 feet, In the Puna grasslands where oxygen is scarce and temperatures swing wildly between day and night, when you first grab a handful of ichu, your instinct might be to let go. The blades are sharp enough to cut if you pull your hand away quickly. They're dry, even when living with a waxy coating that helps them retain moisture in the intense high-altitude sun. They rustle in the wind with a distinctive sound, a whisper that carries across the grasslands like distant conversation. But to a weaver's hands, ichu is possibility. It is strength. It is what allows impossible things to exist. The harvest happened at specific times of year. Too early, and the grass would still be growing, not yet fully developed. Too late, and the rainy season would begin, making drying difficult. The weavers needed grass that had matured but not started to rot, that had been touched by sun but not weathered into brittleness. They cut it close to the ground. Using simple tools, bronze or stone knives in most cases, as iron was unknown in the Andes before Spanish contact. They worked in groups, moving across hillsides, gathering armfuls of grass and bundling them with lengths of cord. A full day's harvest might produce several large bundles, enough to eventually make a section of thick rope, perhaps 10 feet long. The grass then needed to dry. This was not a quick process. The bundles were spread on flat ground, sometimes on stone terraces, sometimes on patches of bare earth cleared specifically for this purpose. They were turned regularly to ensure even drying. Too much moisture, and the grass would mildew, weakening the fibers. Too dry, and it became brittle, prone to snapping. The weavers checked by feel, picked up handfuls, twisted them slightly, tested their pliability. Not yet. Still too soft in the center, or ready now. Bring it to the twisting area. Once dried, the grass had to be prepared. This meant combing through the bundles to remove debris, small stones, other plants, insect casings. It meant selecting blades of similar length and thickness, because inconsistent materials produced inconsistent rope. This sorting was meditative work, the kind that could be done while sitting, while talking, while watching children play nearby. Hands moved automatically, experienced fingers identifying good blades by texture alone. Then came the twisting. This is where grass became cord. Imagine holding a small bundle of ichu blades, perhaps 20 or 30 individual stalks in your left hand. You roll them between your palm and your thigh, using the friction to twist the fibers together. The grass begins to coil, the individual blades interlocking through tiny barbs and textures along their surfaces. As you twist, you gradually feed in more grass, keeping the thickness consistent. Maintaining constant tension, your right hand pulls the newly formed cord away from the twisting point, keeping it from kinking. Your left hand continues the rolling motion, steady, rhythmic, almost meditative. Roll, feed, pull. Roll, feed, pull. The movement becomes automatic. Your mind can wander while your hands work. This single cord, perhaps a quarter-inch thick, rough textured, still smelling of mountain grasses, the basic unit. But a bridge cannot be made of such thin material. What's needed are ropes thick, multi-stranded ropes capable of holding hundreds of pounds of tension, so the single cords are paired. Two cords twisted together in the opposite direction from their original twist. This counter-twisting is crucial. It prevents the rope from uncoiling under stress. If both twists went the same direction, the rope would spiral open when pulled. But with opposing twists, each layer locks the one beneath it. These paired cords become thicker ropes, perhaps an inch in diameter now. Still not enough. So 3 or 4 of these are twisted together, again with the direction of twist alternating. Now you have a rope thick as a man's thumb, strong enough to lift heavy objects, to secure loads on pack animals, to use in ordinary construction. But a bridge needs even more strength. So these thumb-thick ropes are braided together, 6 of them, woven in a pattern that distributes stress evenly. Now you have a cable as thick as a man's wrist, and 6 of these are braided together, creating a cable as thick as a man's arm. This is the size needed for a bridge's main support cables. Each one represents hundreds of hours of labor, thousands of individual ichu blades, each selected, dried, twisted, combined, braided. And a bridge might need 6 or more of these massive cables, 2 main support cables stretched across the canyon. plus additional cables for handrails, plus the woven mat that forms the walking surface, plus anchoring systems. The entire bridge, when complete, might contain several tons of processed grass, which means dozens of tons of raw grass had to be harvested, dried, processed, and woven, all by hand, all without mechanical aid. The physics of this seems impossible until you understand the properties of properly made rope. Grass, when twisted correctly, becomes surprisingly strong. The individual fibers, weak on their own, distribute stress between them when interlocked. Pull on a grass rope and the tension spreads through hundreds, thousands of contact points. No single fiber bears the entire load. Additionally, grass rope has qualities that might seem like disadvantages but actually contribute to its functionality. It's flexible, which means it can absorb dynamic loads, like a person walking, which creates impact forces with each step. It's slightly elastic, which means it can stretch slightly under load and then return to its original length, rather than snapping suddenly like a brittle material might. And it's lightweight, which means the bridge doesn't have to support as much of its own weight, leaving more capacity for cargo. But grass rope also has a critical weakness. It degrades. The sun's UV radiation breaks down the fibers. Moisture encourages mildew. The repeated stress of use thousands of footfalls, tens of thousands of load-bearing moments gradually weakens the structure. A grass rope bridge, unlike a steel one, has a limited lifespan. This is why the bridges needed constant attention, why maintenance was not optional, why communities gathered every year to assess repair, and eventually replace their bridges entirely. The renewal ceremony, which we'll explore more deeply soon, was not just about replacing old rope with new. It was about maintaining knowledge, about ensuring that younger weavers learned the techniques, about testing everyone's skill collectively, in a public demonstration that the community still possessed the expertise necessary to survive in their landscape. Each bridge was slightly different, adapted to its specific location. A bridge spanning a wide canyon might need longer main cables and more complex anchoring systems. A bridge crossing a narrower gap might be simpler, but need to handle steeper approaches. A bridge at high altitude, where sun exposure was intense, might need more frequent renewal. A bridge in a protected valley might last longer. The weavers understood these variations instinctively. They didn't calculate load forces with mathematics. The Inca had sophisticated numerical systems recorded in quipu. But engineering was still largely empirical, based on observation and experience rather than abstract calculation. They knew what worked because they had seen what worked. They knew what would fail because they had seen failures. Bridge sagged too much last year. We need thicker main cables. The eastern anchor point is in softer stone. We need to distribute the load more carefully there. Approach on the northern side is steep. We need more foothold notches cut into the rock. These were the discussions. Practical, specific, grounded in material reality. And through it all, the grass. Always the grass. Growing on distant hillsides, waiting to be transformed. Waiting for human hands to recognize its potential. Waiting to become, through patient labor, the threads that held an empire together. As your breathing slows and deepens, as your body settles into rest, imagine the texture. The rough, dry grass between your fingers. The rhythm of twisting, steady, and eternal. The slow transformation of simple plants into complex structures. And know that this transformation happened because people, ordinary people, with no special powers except patience and skilled, excited it was possible, decided it was necessary, and did the work year after year, generation after generation, till the impossible became routine. The old bridge sags. After a year of use, thousands of crossings, countless loads, exposure to sun and wind and occasional rain, the grass has stretched and weathered. The braiding has loosened slightly. The main cables have developed subtle weaknesses, places where fibers have frayed. It is still safe. The weavers inspect it regularly, and they know the difference between normal wear and dangerous degradation. But it is time. Time for renewal. time for the community to gather and, in a process that is part engineering and part ceremony, replace the old bridge with a new one. This is not merely practical work. It is a ritual, an event that marks the passing of another year, the continuation of traditions, the reaffirmation of community bonds. When a bridge is rebuilt, it is not just grass and labor that are woven together. It is the community itself reconnecting with its past, ensuring its future. It's maintaining the social fabric that mirrors the physical structure spanning the canyon. The timing is set well in advance. Inca officials traveling the road network announce when each bridge should be renewed. This is coordinated across the empire. You cannot have multiple bridges on the same road section being rebuilt simultaneously, or travel would be disrupted. So the renewals are staggered, scheduled, organized with the same attention to logistics that any modern infrastructure project would require. As the appointed time approaches, the community begins to gather materials. The grass has already been harvested and dried in the preceding weeks. The base ropes have been twisted and combined into thick cables. Enormous coils of rope, each one heavy enough to require multiple people to move, are staged at both ends of the canyon, ready for the construction to begin. People arrive from surrounding villages. Bridge construction is not the responsibility of a single settlement, but of all communities that use the crossing. Some send their strongest young men needed for the heavy work of pulling cables across the gap. Others send their most skilled weavers, whose expertise ensures quality. Still others send cooks, who will prepare food for the workers, turning the construction into a shared meal, a feast that will fuel both bodies and spirits. There is music, drums and flutes and voices raised in traditional songs. These are not merely entertainment, they serve a practical function. When dozens of people need to pull together on a rope, they need to coordinate their efforts. The music provides rhythm, ensures that everyone pulls at the same moment, transforming individual effort into collective force. The first step is removing the old bridge. This is done carefully, not by cutting it down, which would be wasteful and dangerous. A falling bridge could injure people below or damage equipment, but by gradually releasing tension and lowering sections to the canyon floor or pulling them back to the sides, the old grass will be repurposed to as kindling, composted into fields, offered in smaller quantities to the spirit. World in thanks for another year of safe crossings. Then the anchoring points are inspected. These are massive stone structures, often natural rock formations that have been slightly modified, carved with channels where ropes will sit, reinforced with additional stones, stacked and fitted together. The anchors must be absolutely solid. If they fail, the entire bridge fails. So they are checked carefully, repairs made if necessary. Sometimes offerings are placed coca leaves, chicha corn beer, prayers spoken in Quechua, asking the apis, the mountain spirits, to hold the bridge firm. Now comes the most dramatic moment, stretching the main support. Cables across the canyon. Several methods exist. Depending on the canyon's specific geography, sometimes a lighter rope messenger line is carried across first. A brave volunteer, often a young man proving his courage, crosses using the remnants of the old bridge or, if that's been fully removed, descends into the canyon, crosses the river at a lower point where it's possible, and climbs the far side. He carries a light cord, which is then used to pull heavier ropes across, which in turn pull the massive main cables. Other times, the lighter rope is shot across using a sling or thrown with weights attached. It takes multiple attempts, but eventually someone on the far side catches or retrieves it, and the process of pulling larger ropes can begin. The massive main cables are incredibly heavy. Moving them requires coordinated effort. Teams of pullers on the far side of the canyon lean back against the weight, feet braced, muscles straining, pulling in rhythm to the drums and chanting. Slowly, sometimes taking hours, the thick cable inches across the gap. Meanwhile, on the near side, other teams control the paying out of the rope, ensuring it doesn't snag or twist, keeping tension appropriate. Too much tension, and it's impossible to pull. Too little, and the rope might catch on rocks or vegetation on the canyon walls, and slowly, possibly, The cable stretches across the emptiness. It sags in the middle, hanging in a great curve, but it reaches. Both sides are now connected. This moment when the first main cable spans the canyon is celebrated. Music intensifies. People cheer. Children, who have been watching wide-eyed, dance with excitement. The hardest part is done. The bridge has begun. The second main cable follows the same process. Slightly easier now because workers can reference the first cable. Ensure the spacing is correct. Use the first cable to help guide the second. Once both main support cables are in place and secured to the anchoring points with elaborate systems of knots and wrapping, the bridge has its backbone. Next come the side cables, the handrails. These are thinner than the main supports but still substantial, thick enough to grip firmly, positioned at waist height on both sides of what will become the walking path. They follow the curve of the main cables, supported at intervals by vertical cords that hang from the main support cables, and then the floor is woven. This is intricate work, requiring patience and skill. Smaller ropes are stretched across between the main support cables, creating a lattice. Then even smaller cords are woven through this lattice, creating a mat not solid like a wooden floor, but a flexible woven surface that provides secure footing while also allowing air and light through. Walking on this surface requires trust. You can see between the gaps. You can see straight down to the river far below, but the weave is tight enough that feet don't slip through. And the flexibility actually helps the floor move slightly with each step, absorbing impact, making the walk less jarring than it would be on a rigid surface. The entire construction, from removing the old bridge to completing the new one, might take 3 to 5 days. It is intensive work, but it is also communal time. Stories are told during rest breaks. Romances begin between young people from different villages. Children play under the supervision of elders, too old for heavy labor, but who still attend to maintain connection, to watch the traditions continue. And there's always food. Large communal meals, with dishes brought by different families. Potatoes roasted in earth ovens. Quinoa stews. Tuna freeze-dried potatoes, a preservation technique unique to the high Andes. Dried llama meat. Coca leaves to chew, which provide mild stimulation and help with altitude, are passed around. Chichacorn beer is shared, served from ceramic vessels, poured as offerings before being consumed. The completion of the bridge is marked by a ceremony. A priest or community leader crosses first, carrying offerings, speaking prayers, asking for the bridge's safety. Sometimes a small ritual sacrifice is performed, a guinea pig or a white llama, offered to the Apis and to Pachamama, the Earth Mother. The blood is sprinkled on the bridge, the body buried near the anchoring points. This might seem strange to modern sensibilities, but in the Andean worldview, the bridge is alive. It is not merely an object, but a being. Connection not just between two pieces of land, but between the human world and the sacred world. The bridge must be blessed, must be welcomed into existence, must be asked to be strong and safe. After the priest crosses, others follow. The bridge is tested with weight, with movement, with careful attention to how it responds. The weavers watch for any signs of weakness, any points where adjustment is needed. Sometimes additional support cords are added. Sometimes the floor weave is tightened in specific spots. Sometimes the main cables are adjusted at the anchor points to change the bridge's tension or its curve. And finally, when everyone is satisfied, the bridge is opened. Officially, ceremonially, it becomes part of the road network again. Travelers who have been waiting sometimes for days, allowed to cross. Trade resumes. Messages continue. Life flows. The community celebrates. Not with great pageantry, this is not a coronation or a temple dedication, but with quiet satisfaction. The work is done. The bridge stands. For another year, the connection holds. As the sun sets on that day, fires burn at both ends of the canyon. People linger, reluctant to leave, even though home is waiting. There is something profound about what has just been accomplished, something worth savoring. They have taken simple mountain grass and made a crossing. They have looked at an obstacle that should have been insurmountable, and through collective effort and inherited knowledge, they have made it passable. This is human civilization in its essence. Not the monuments or the written words or the great buildings, but this. Ordinary people working together, solving problems, making life possible in places where life should not be possible. And as you drift toward sleep, imagine being there. Feeling the satisfaction of work completed, watching the first travelers cross the new bridge, their faces showing relief and trust. Knowing that your hands helped weave those cables, that your effort is part of why this connection exists. And feeling, in the deepening twilight, with the river's roar rising from the canyon below, a profound sense of place, of belonging, of being woven into something larger than yourself, a community, a tradition, a bridge stretched across time itself. ... There is a world beneath the world, or perhaps above it, or perhaps threaded through it like weft through warp. Inseparable from the physical reality we touch and see, yet distinct, populated by forces and beings that require acknowledgement, respect, negotiation. This was the Andean worldview. Not a division between sacred and secular, but an understanding that everything, every stone, every mountain, every river, every bridge existed simultaneously in the material realm and the spiritual realm. The bridge you walked across was not just grass rope. It was also a connection between worlds, a pathway that spirits might travel as readily as humans, a structure that required blessing as much as it required engineering. The concept of Pasha is central to understanding this. Pasha is often translated as time or earth or world, but it means something more encompassing. It is the totality of existence, past, present, and future woven together. The earth below and sky above. The seen and unseen. Everything exists within Pasha. Interconnected. Interdependent. When the Inca spoke of Pachamama, the Earth Mother, they were not speaking metaphorically. Pachamama was real, present, alive. She was the soil that grew the crops, the mountains that provided shelter, the stones used in construction. She was generous, but also demanding. She gave, but she required reciprocity. You could not simply take from her without giving back. This principle, reciprocity, governed not just human relationships, but relationships between humans and the spirit world. When you harvested grass for rope making, you thanked Pachamama and left offerings. When you built a bridge, you acknowledged the Apos, the mountain spirits, who held the anchor points and watched over the canyon. When you crossed a bridge, you might breathe a prayer, leave a small offering of coca leaves, whisper, "Thanks for safe passage." The rope bridge, then, was a deeply sacred structure. It connected not just one riverbank to another, but the human world to the divine world. It was liminal space, threshold, boundary, crossing point. And liminal spaces, in most spiritual traditions, are places of power and danger. It's places that require careful attention. The construction of a bridge was therefore never just technical work. It was ceremony from beginning to end. Each step accompanied by appropriate rituals. When the grass was first harvested, offerings were made. A small pit might be dug in the hillside where the best ichu grew, and into this pit, the workers placed coca leaves, the sacred plant of the Andes. Used in divination, medicine, and offerings. Sometimes they poured chicha, the fermented corn beer that was itself a sacred drink, before being shared among people. And they spoke to Pachamama, to the Apis, to the spirits of place, asking permission to take the grass, promising to use it well, acknowledging that they were part of a cycle of giving and receiving. During the twisting and braiding of ropes, the work was often accompanied by songs. Not just work songs to maintain rhythm, but songs that told stories of previous bridges, of ancestors who had been master weavers, of the sacred geography they inhabited. These songs were prayers in themselves, ways of maintaining connection with the spiritual dimension of the work. The bridge construction ceremony we discussed earlier had sacred elements woven throughout. The priest or spiritual leader who crossed first was not just testing the bridge's strength. He was consecrating it, blessing it, introducing it to the spirits and asking for their protection. The offerings placed at anchor points the blood of sacrificed animals, the coca leaves, The chicha poured onto stone were not superstition, but essential elements of the bridge's completion. Without these offerings, the Inca believed the bridge would be incomplete, physically present but spiritually unconnected. Dangerous because it would exist in the material world without proper acknowledgement in the spiritual world. The spirits might be offended. The apis might withdraw their support. The bridge might stand physically, but fail in other ways. Accidents might happen. Structural weaknesses might develop faster than normal. Travelers might lose their footing for no apparent reason. We might view this as magical thinking, but from within the Andean worldview, it was entirely logical. If everything is interconnected, if the material and spiritual are aspects of the same reality, then building a bridge without spiritual attention would be like building it while ignoring the wind or the water, addressing only some of the forces at play while ignoring others equally real. The bridge also had symbolic meanings beyond its immediate function. It represented the Inca state's ability to connect disparate peoples and places into a unified whole. Just as the physical bridge connected riverbanks, the empire connected ethnic groups, languages, ecological zones. The bridge was a metaphor made literal, the state's power to weave separate strands into functional unity. Additionally, the bridge symbolized the relationship between the Sapa, Inca emperor, and his subjects. In Inca ideology, the emperor was the son of the sun, a divine figure whose rule was both political and spiritual. He maintained order in the world, kept the cosmic balance, ensured that the relationship between humans and the divine remained strong. The bridges maintained through middle labor demonstrated this cosmic order in physical form. They showed that the system worked, that collective effort produced results, that the emperor's organization of society was effective and legitimate. When bridges failed, which occasionally happened, usually due to catastrophic events like earthquakes or unusually severe flooding, it was seen as more than just an engineering problem. It could be interpreted as a sign of cosmic imbalance, of failure in the relationship between humans and the divine. This is why bridge maintenance was taken so seriously. Allowing a bridge to fall into disrepair was not just dangerous, it was spiritually problematic. The crossing of a bridge was itself a liminal experience with spiritual dimensions. To step from solid ground onto a swaying rope structure, to move through air above a roaring river, to reach the other side and step back onto earth, this was a journey, a transformation. Travelers might pause before crossing to prepare themselves mentally and spiritually. They might make small offerings. They might invoke protection. There are accounts from Spanish chroniclers of Inca messengers who, even while running at top speed to deliver urgent messages, would pause briefly at a bridge to breathe a prayer before crossing. This wasn't superstition slowing them down, it was essential preparation. As important as checking that their sandals were tied, or that their message was secure, certain bridges were considered especially sacred. These were usually ancient crossings, places where bridges had existed for generations, where the land itself was saturated with spiritual significance. Sometimes these locations were associated with mythological events or with appearances of divine beings. To cross these bridges was to participate in sacred history, to walk literally in the footsteps of ancestors and possibly even gods. One particular bridge, whose exact location has been lost, but which is mentioned in several Spanish chronicles, was said to have been built by the legendary first Inca ruler, Manco Capac, or by the creator god Viracocha himself. Whether this was literally true or mythological, the belief shaped how people interacted with that bridge. Crossing it was pilgrimage. Maintaining it was highest honor. Allowing it to fail would have been unthinkable. The rope itself carried symbolic weight. Twisted fibers, individual strands woven into stronger cords, multiple cords braided into cables. This was a clear metaphor for social organization. One person is weak. Many people working together are strong. One family is vulnerable. Many families woven into a community can survive. One province might fall. Many provinces bound into an empire can endure. The Inca were not subtle about this symbolism. They understood that symbols shape thought, that metaphors create reality. By making the physical infrastructure of their empire depend on weaving, on the literal intertwining of individual elements into collective structures. They reinforced the ideological message that collective effort, organization, and unity were what made civilization possible. There was also symbolism in the temporary nature of grass rope. Unlike Roman stone bridges that proclaimed permanence, or modern steel structures designed to last generations with minimal maintenance, the grass bridges required constant attention. They were humble. They acknowledged their own impermanence. They admitted that nothing lasts without effort, that maintenance and renewal are not failures but necessities. This aligned with Andean spiritual concepts of time as cyclical rather than linear. The year turned through its seasons: planting, growing, harvest, fallow in, then began again. The bridge was rebuilt each year in alignment with this cycle. Old grass returned to the earth. New grass was woven into cables. The tradition continued not despite change but through change, through constant renewal that honored both continuity and transformation. Offerings were made not just at construction but throughout the bridge's life. Travelers might leave small tokens, a handful of stones placed carefully at the bridge's entrance, coca leaves tucked into the rope weaving, prayers whispered as they crossed. These accumulations of small devotions transformed the bridge into a shrine, a place where the boundary between everyday travel and sacred journey became thin, and there were stories. Every bridge accumulated them stories of miraculous crossings, of travelers saved from disaster, of divine intervention. Perhaps a bridge that should have collapsed in a storm but held. Perhaps a traveler who slipped but somehow caught hold, impossibly, and pulled themselves back up. Perhaps a child who wandered onto a bridge at night and was guided safely across by a mysterious light. These stories were not recorded in writing. The Inca had no written language, but they lived in oral tradition, told and retold, changing slightly with each telling, but maintaining their essential truth. They were part of the bridge's identity, its spiritual reality. They taught lessons about respect, about faith, about the relationship between human effort and divine grace. The weavers, too, were seen as having a sacred role. Their knowledge was not just technical, but spiritual. To know how to make rope that could hold human life was to participate in the sustaining of the world. Master weavers were respected not just as craftspeople, but as individuals who had achieved a kind of spiritual mastery, who understood the deep connections between material and sacred. Some weavers developed reputations as particularly blessed. Bridges they helped build were said to be stronger, to last longer, to be protected by especially attentive spirits. These master weavers might be asked to lead renewal ceremonies, to speak the most important prayers, to make the first knots when construction began. Their presence sanctified the work, and when a weaver died, especially a master weaver, the community mourned. Not just a person, but a connection to the sacred knowledge. Burial ceremonies might include pieces of rope, symbolic offerings of the craft that had defined the deceased's life and contribution. The rope was both marker of identity and offering to the afterlife. A way of saying, this is who they were, this is how they served, this is what they leave behind, as the night deepens around you. As your mind drifts through these layers of meaning, consider what it means to live in a world so thoroughly enchanted, where every action has spiritual dimension, where work is also worship, where the material and sacred are not separate categories but aspects of a unified whole. It was a demanding worldview. You could not simply do things without considering their broader implications. But it was also rich, meaningful, connected. The bridge is grass, and also prayer. The crossing is travel, and also transformation. The work is labor, and also ceremony. Everything woven together, threads of meaning running through threads of fiber, creating a structure that holds not just physical weight, but spiritual significance. Carrying people across not just space, but through the very fabric of existence itself. Dawn breaks slowly in the mountains. The sun rises somewhere beyond the eastern peaks. And for a long time before it actually appears, the world brightens incrementally black, fading to deep blue, then to lighter blue, then to the pale wash of early morning. Stars fade. The constellations, the Inca Nutha, dark cloud patterns visible in the Milky Way. The animals and figures they saw in the spaces between stars rather than in the stars themselves, all these dissolve into the coming day. A traveler wakes in a tambo, one of the rest houses spaced along the road network. The tambo is simple stone walls, a thatched roof, sleeping platforms, a fire pit, but it's sufficient. It's provided shelter from the cold night, a place to rest, stationed in the Empire's circulatory system of people and information. Today's journey includes a bridge crossing. Everyone knows which bridge lies ahead, the Great Canyon Crossing. The one that hangs above the Apormac River, the one that creaks and sways, the one that requires courage even from experienced travelers. The traveler eats a simple breakfast roasted maize, perhaps some dried potato, coca leaves to chew for energy. And then, as the sun finally breaks over the peaks, casting long shadows across the valley, the journey continues. The road here is paved with flat stones, fitted carefully to create an even surface. The Inca roads were engineering marvels themselves, separate from the bridges, but equally impressive. They included drainage systems, retaining walls on steep sections, stairs carved into rock faces. They were built to last, and many sections still exist today, still walkable after 500 years. But the road is approaching the canyon now. You can hear it before you see it, the distant roar of water, faint at first, but growing steadily louder. The road begins to descend slightly, following the terrain toward the crossing point. Trees become sparse. The ground becomes more rocky. And then suddenly, the road reaches the edge. The canyon opens before you like a wound in the earth. From this vantage point, standing where the road simply ends, you can see across to the other side, perhaps 300 feet away, though it's hard to judge distance across such emptiness. The far cliff face looks both close enough to touch and impossibly distant. Between here and there, nothing. Just air, and far below, the thin white line of the river, its roar echoing up through the canyon like the breath of the earth itself, and spanning this gap. The bridge from a distance, it looks impossibly fragile. A line of grass rope, golden brown in the morning light, stretching across the void. But as you approach, the bridge reveals its true scale. The main support cables are as thick as your thigh. The handrail ropes are substantial, clearly capable of bearing weight. The woven floor, though you can see through its gaps, is tightly constructed, each element locked in place. The bridge's entrance is marked. Often there are stone cairns on either side, built up over years as travelers added stones in passing, small offerings, small prayers. Sometimes there are more elaborate markers, carved posts, stone platforms, niches where offerings of coca leaves or small items have been left. The bridge is not just infrastructure. It is a shrine, a sacred threshold. The traveler pauses here. This is customary, expected. You do not simply walk onto the bridge without acknowledgement. The pause serves multiple purposes. It's a moment to prepare mentally, to calm your breathing, to center yourself. It's also spiritual preparation. The traveler might breathe a prayer, whispered thanks to the weavers who made this crossing possible. Acknowledge the apis, watching over the canyon. Some travelers leave offerings. A small handful of coca leaves, placed carefully at the bridge entrance. A sip of water poured onto the stone. Even just a moment of stillness, of conscious gratitude. These are not merely superstitious gestures, but acts of reciprocity, of maintaining proper relationship with the forces, material and spiritual, that make this crossing possible. And then, the step. From solid rock onto woven grass, from stillness onto movement, the bridge responds immediately to your weight. It doesn't sag dramatically. The engineering is too good for that, but you feel it. The floor gives slightly, the entire structure settling infinitesimally under your mass. The main cables creak, not a sound of breaking but of working, of fiber pulling against fiber, of the bridge doing what it was made to do. You take another step. The bridge sways. Not wildly, but noticeably. This is by design. The flexibility that makes grass rope bridges functional also makes them dynamic. They move with wind, with weight, with the small earthquakes that rumble through the Andes with surprising frequency. A rigid bridge might snap. A flexible one survives by adapting your hands grip the handrail ropes. They're rough under your palms, the texture of dried grass immediately apparent. They're warm from the sun, or cool if you're crossing early before the canyon has heated. They're solid, substantial. You can pull on them for balance, and they hold firm. Another step, and another. You're moving away from the edge now, out over the void. If you look down and the gaps in the woven floor make it impossible not to, you see space. Just space, dropping away. The canyon walls below you, rock faces striped with different colors of stone, occasional vegetation clinging to impossible ledges. And far, far below the river, the sound of the water is constant. A white noise roar that fills the canyon, that you feel as much as hear. It's the sound of power, of unstoppable force. Of water that has been cutting this canyon for millions of years and will continue cutting long after you're gone. It's humbling. It puts your small human presence into perspective. You are tiny, temporary, fragile, and yet you're crossing. You're achieving the impossible, held aloft by grass and human ingenuity. The bridge continues to move. With each step, you generate small oscillations that travel through the structure. If there are other people on the bridge, which there often were, as crossings could take several minutes and traffic was steady, you feel their movements too. The bridge becomes a shared experience, a collective navigation of space. You time your steps, sometimes consciously matching rhythm with other travelers to smooth out the swaying, sometimes deliberately avoiding rhythm to prevent resonance from building up. Experienced travelers cross with remarkable speed and confidence. The relay messengers who ran routes throughout the empire could cross major bridges in under a minute, running despite the sway, trusting their balance and the bridge's strength completely. They trained for this, learned to read the bridge's movements, to anticipate the sway and counter it with body position, to move fluidly through space that would terrify untrained travelers. But most people crossed more slowly, carefully, not from fear exactly, but from respect. From understanding that this crossing required attention, presence, awareness. You didn't cross a major canyon bridge while distracted or careless. You focused. You paid attention. You were fully present in the moment, aware of every sensation: the rope under your hands, the woven grass under your feet, the wind on your face, the roar of the river, the creaking of the cables. Some people prayed throughout the crossing. Continuous whispered prayers, asking for protection, thanking the weavers, acknowledging the apis. The rhythm of prayer matched the rhythm of steps, creating a meditative state that carried them across. Others sang. Crossing songs existed, passed down through generations. Simple melodies, easy to remember, with lyrics about bridges and journeys and safe arrival. Singing served multiple purposes, calmed the singer. It marked time. It created community among travelers crossing together. The sound of human voices rising above the river's roar. Asserting human presence in this liminal space between earth and sky, children crossed holding adult hands. Wide-eyed, sometimes frightened, but trusting. They learned early that bridges were normal, that fear could be managed, that trust in community infrastructure was warranted. By the time they were adults, they would cross with the same confidence their parents showed, and they would teach their own children the same lessons. Llamas crossed, carrying cargo. This required careful handling. Llamas are sure-footed but can be stubborn, and a panicked llama on a swaying bridge could cause problems. Experienced herders knew how to keep their animals calm, how to time the crossing, how to lead them across in small groups rather than large herds. The llama's hooves made different sounds on the woven floor than human feet did, a sharper clicking, different rhythm. Occasionally, something would be dropped. A piece of cargo working loose from a llama's pack. A small item falling from a traveler's pouch. These items would fall through the gaps in the woven floor, tumbling down through the air, becoming smaller and smaller until they disappeared into the river far below. Such losses were accepted as part of travel, as the price of crossing. You didn't stop to mourn a dropped item. You kept moving, kept your focus on completing the crossing safely. And then, gradually, the far side grows closer. You can see details now, the specific rocks at the anchor point, the offerings left by previous travelers, the continuation of the road rising up from the canyon's edge. The bridge doesn't seem to end so much as blend back into solid ground. The woven floor transitions to stone, the handrail ropes meet carved posts, and suddenly your feet are on rock again. Solid, unmoving, blessed rock. Many travelers paused here too at the far side. A moment of relief, of gratitude for safe crossing. Some people touched the ground, literally laying palms on stone, re-establishing connection with the earth after suspended transit through air. Some left offerings here as well, thank you offerings, acknowledging that they made it across, that the bridge held, that they're now continuing their journey, and then the road continues. Rising from the canyon edge, returning to normal terrain, proceeding toward whatever destination calls. But the crossing has marked you. You've passed through liminal space. You've trusted something woven by human hands to hold you above an abyss. You've participated, however briefly, in the miracle of connection that these bridges represent. For regular travelers, people who crossed the same bridges many times, who knew every creak and sway, who had crossed in sun and wind, and occasional light rain, the bridges became familiar. Not exactly comfortable, perhaps, but known. Like old friends with quirks and personalities, this bridge swayed more. That bridge had a spot in the middle where the floor weave was slightly looser, where you could feel individual chords under your feet. Another bridge had a musical quality to its creaking, an almost pleasant sound. And through all of this regular traffic, thousands of crossings per year, tens of thousands over the bridge's lifetime, the bridges held. They did what they were made to do. They connected. They carried. They enabled an empire to function across impossible terrain. As sleep pulls you deeper, imagine one more crossing. Night has fallen. The stars are brilliant in the thin mountain air. The Milky Way so bright, it casts shadows. You're crossing a bridge by starlight, the woven floor barely visible beneath your feet. The far side, a darkness against darkness. The river roars below, invisible but present. The handrail ropes guide you forward, rough and real under your palms. Step by step, the bridge sways. The stars wheel overhead. And you move through space held by grass and trust and the accumulated skill of generations. Crossing not just a canyon, but time itself. Walking a path that connects you to everyone who ever crossed before, everyone who will cross after. All of you held aloft by threads woven with care, with skill, with the quiet devotion of people whose names are forgotten, but whose work endures. ... There is a difference between building and maintaining. Building is dramatic, something that didn't exist comes into being. The transformation visible and complete. Maintenance is subtler. It's the work that keeps things functioning, that prevents decay. That ensures today resembles yesterday enough that life can continue its patterns. The bridges required both. But it was the maintenance, the quiet, constant attention that truly kept them functioning. Without it, the most perfectly built bridge would fail within months, deteriorating under the combined assault of weather, use, and time. Maintenance began the day after construction finished. It never stopped. It was woven into the rhythm of daily life as thoroughly as the bridges themselves were woven from grass. Local communities assigned specific individuals to bridge monitoring roles. These weren't full-time positions. People still farmed, still attended to family responsibilities, still participated in other forms of middle labor. But part of their duty involved regular bridge inspection. Perhaps once a week, perhaps more often, during seasons of heavy use or after storms, they would walk the bridge slowly, carefully. Looking for signs of wear or damage, they checked the main support cables first. These bore the most stress and were the most critical components. The inspector, usually someone with years of experience, someone who had helped build or rebuild the bridge multiple times, would grip the cables, squeeze them, feel for looseness. Healthy rope felt dense, compact. Rope that was beginning to fail felt softer, the individual fibers separating slightly. The whole cable losing its tight cohesion, they looked for fraying. places where repeated rubbing against stone anchors or against wooden saddles had worn through outer layers of fiber. Fraying wasn't immediately dangerous, but it indicated weak points that needed watching. That might require early repair if they worsened. They checked the handrails, walking along both sides of the bridge, gripping the rope every few feet, pulling on it to test resistance. A good handrail had no give-it, was tensioned tightly enough that pulling on it produced no perceptible movement. A handrail that had begun to stretch, or whose anchor points were working loose, would feel different. Subtle, but different enough for experienced hands to notice. The floor weave required close attention. The inspector walked slowly, sometimes on hands and knees, examining the woven mat that formed the walking surface. They looked for broken cords, for places where the weave had loosened, for gaps that had widened beyond acceptable limits. They tested suspicious areas by pressing on them, seeing how much they gave, feeling whether the underlying structure was still sound. Damage was recorded not in writing, as the Inca lacked written language, but in quipu, the system of knotted strings that served as records and messages throughout the empire. A quipu specialist might maintain records of bridge conditions, using different knots and colors to indicate different types of wear, different levels of concern. These records would be reviewed by officials used to schedule maintenance work, used to determine when early renewal might be necessary. Minor repairs happened continuously. If a single cord in the floor weave broke, it was replaced immediately, cutting out the damaged section, splicing in new grass rope, reweaving the area. This could be done by 1 or 2 people in an hour or two, preventing small problems from becoming large ones. If the handrail showed wear at a particular point, often where it rubbed against stone, additional wrapping might be added. Fresh grass rope wound tightly around the worn section, distributing future wear over a larger area, protecting the underlying cable if the anchoring systems showed signs of movement. If stones in the anchor structures were shifting, if the carved channels where main cables rested showed new wear patterns, these were addressed immediately. Stones were reset, new stones added, the entire anchoring system inspected and reinforced. An anchor point failure would be catastrophic, so any sign of weakness received urgent attention. After storms, inspections intensified. Heavy rain could soak the bridge, and while grass rope maintained its strength when wet, repeated wetting and drying cycles accelerated deterioration. Wind could damage the bridge more directly. Strong gusts could set up resonant oscillations, causing the bridge to sway violently. Usually the bridges survived this, but occasionally cables would be damaged. The floor weave would be partially torn, or anchoring points would be stressed beyond normal limits. In rare cases, major repairs were needed mid-year. If damage was extensive enough, sections of the bridge might need to be replaced. This required coordinating workers, gathering materials, performing construction work on an existing structure, often more difficult than building fresh. But it was done when necessary, because allowing the bridge to fail was unthinkable. The seasonal full renewal was different from maintenance. It was scheduled, anticipated, ritualized. As the dry season approached, the time when weather was most predictable and materials easiest to work with, preparations began. The grass was harvested, dried and twisted into base ropes over a period of weeks. This work was distributed among multiple families, each producing a portion of the total rope needed. The work was done at home, in spare time, woven into the rhythms of domestic life. A woman might twist rope while watching children play. A man might work on rope in the evening after returning from the fields. Grandparents, too old for heavy labor, could still contribute by processing grass or testing finished rope. As the date of renewal approached, these individual ropes were gathered. Community members brought their contributions to a central staging area near the bridge. The ropes were inspected, tested, sorted by quality. The best ropes, the most tightly twisted, the most evenly constructed, would be used for main support cables. Slightly lesser quality ropes would become handrails or floor weaving. Everything was used. Nothing was wasted. The renewal ceremony itself, which we discussed in an earlier chapter, was as much about community cohesion as about bridge replacement. It was a time when people from different villages, you might not otherwise interact regularly, came together for shared purpose. Friendships formed. Information was exchanged. Children played together while adults worked. Marriages were occasionally arranged. Young people from different communities meeting and forming connections that would bind their families together as surely. As the rope bound the bridge, the old bridge was dismantled with care and respect. It had served well, carried thousands of people safely, fulfilled its purpose. The grass, now weathered and worn, was not simply discarded. Some was used as kindling good fuel for fires burning hot and clean. Some was composted, returned to fields as fertilizer. Some was used in smaller projects, cordage for household needs, material for teaching children weaving techniques, and some, usually a small portion of the old bridge, carefully selected, was kept as an offering. It might be burned ceremonially, the smoke carrying prayers to the sky. It might be buried at the anchor points, returned to the earth with thanks. The old bridge in these traditions was not just used up and thrown away. It was honored, acknowledged, sent on with gratitude. The new bridge was not exactly identical to the old one. Each renewal incorporated improvements, corrections, adjustments based on the previous year's performance. If the bridge had sagged more than ideal in certain spots, the new one would have additional support cords in those areas. If the floor weave had worn faster on one side, perhaps due to traffic patterns, the new weave would be reinforced there. If anchor points had shown stress, the new installation would distribute loads differently. This iterative improvement meant that bridge design evolved, not through formal engineering calculations, but through direct observation and incremental adjustment. Over generations, bridges became optimized for their specific locations, perfectly adapted to the unique challenges of their particular canyons. Knowledge transfer was built into the renewal process. Master weavers worked alongside apprentices, demonstrating techniques, explaining decisions, answering questions. See how I'm twisting this? Feel the tension. That's what you're aiming for. Look at how these cables cross at the anchor point. This distributes the load evenly across the rock face. Young people learned by doing, starting with simpler tasks, whisting grass into basic cord, fetching materials, assisting with floor weaving, and gradually progressing to more complex and critical work. By the time they were adults, they had participated in multiple renewals, had seen the entire process many times, had absorbed the knowledge through direct experience. This oral and physical transmission of knowledge was remarkably effective. It produced consistent results across generations, maintained quality standards, ensured that no critical information was lost. The bridges of 1400 were built using essentially the same techniques as the bridges of 1500, which suggests a stable tradition successfully passing knowledge across at least 5 generations. But it also meant that knowledge was vulnerable. If an entire generation of weavers were lost through disease, through conquest, through any disaster that broke the chain of transmission, the knowledge could be lost entirely. This nearly happened after the Spanish conquest, as we'll discuss in the next chapter. But in the functioning Inca Empire, the system was robust, reliable, self-perpetuating. The maintenance work, the constant attention, the yearly renewals, all of this required organization. Someone had to coordinate schedules, ensure materials were ready, track which communities were responsible for which bridges, resolve disputes, inspect finished work. This administrative infrastructure was part of the broader Inca bureaucratic system, but it operated largely at local levels, with communities managing their own bridges under general supervision from regional officials. This distributed responsibility created resilience. If central authority faltered, the bridges could still be maintained because local communities understood their importance and possessed the knowledge to do the work. The bridges were not dependent on emperor's orders, but on local necessity, on the immediate understanding that without the bridges, the community would be isolated, cut off, unable to trade or travel or survive as part of the larger world. There was pride in this work. Despite being taxation, despite being obligatory, bridge maintenance was also something people took satisfaction in. To be known as a skilled weaver, to have your ropes selected for critical sections of a bridge, to be asked to lead a renewal ceremony, these were honors, markers of status, sources of legitimate pride. and the bridges themselves became part of community identity. Our bridge didn't just mean the bridge we maintain. It meant the bridge that is part of who we are, that connects us to our neighbors, that carries our history. Each bridge had its own character, its own stories, its own place in the local understanding of landscape and community. As you drift into deeper sleep, imagine the quiet satisfaction of maintenance. Not the dramatic moment of completion, but the steady, ongoing attention that keeps things working. The weekly inspection walk, checking familiar cables, noting small changes, making minor adjustments. The knowledge that your attention, your care, your willingness to notice small problems before they become large ones is what keeps people safe, is what allows life to continue, is what transforms temporary grass into enduring connection. There is beauty in maintenance, in the work that never finishes, in the attention that never ceases, in the quiet devotion that says, "This matters, this is worth preserving, this is worth the effort." Day after day, year after year, generation after generation, ... change came from the sea. In 1532, a Spanish expedition led by Francisco Pizarro landed on the Peruvian coast and began moving inland. The Inca Empire, at that moment, was already weak in civil war between two claimants to the throne, had divided loyalties and depleted resources. European diseases, which traveled faster than the conquistadors themselves, had already killed enormous numbers of people, including the previous emperor. The Spanish brought horses, steel weapons, firearms, and an entirely different worldview. They also brought contempt for much of what they encountered. The Inca had no wheeled vehicles, no written language, no iron tools, and to Spanish eyes, this meant they were primitive, barbaric, ripe for conquest and conversion. But the Spanish also recognized sophistication when they saw it. The stone cities impressed them, the gold and silver treasures astounded them, and the roads, the vast, well-maintained road network clearly demonstrated organizational capacity far beyond what they had expected to find in the New World. The bridges, though, were a problem. Spanish horses and Spanish soldiers, accustomed to solid wooden or stone bridges, reacted with fear and sometimes refusal when confronted with swaying grass rope structures. Several conquistadors wrote about their terror crossing these bridges. Pedro Sancho, who accompanied Pizarro, described a crossing as the most terrifying thing that can be seen, noting that the bridge swayed so violently he was certain it would collapse. But it didn't collapse. The bridges held, even under the weight of armored men and panicked horses. The Spanish crossed, often blindfolding their horses, sometimes leading them with ropes, always with great apprehension. And they had to admit, grudgingly, that these primitive structures functioned remarkably well. However, the Spanish preferred their own methods, as they consolidated control over the former Inca territories. They began building roads and bridges according to European styles. Stone bridges, where possible. Wooden bridges where stone wasn't feasible. Ferries for the widest rivers. They had iron tools, which made some types of construction easier. They had different labor organization, based on Spanish colonial systems rather than the Mita. More significantly, they disrupted the social systems that maintained the grass bridges. The Mita was transformed from a reciprocal labor obligation into a brutal form of forced labor, particularly in silver mines, where indigenous people died by the thousands in hellish conditions. The community organization that had allowed bridge maintenance to function smoothly was shattered by conquest, by disease epidemics that killed vast percentages of the population, by forced relocations as the Spanish concentrated indigenous people into new settlements for easier control and conversion. The rope bridges began to fail. Not immediately. Some continued to be maintained for decades after the conquest, but gradually, the knowledge began to fade. As communities were disrupted, as populations crashed, as younger generations were pulled away to work in mines or on Spanish estates, fewer people learned the weaving techniques. Fewer bridges were maintained properly. More bridges fell into disrepair. Some bridges were deliberately destroyed. During various uprisings and rebellions against Spanish rule, both sides targeted bridges as strategic infrastructure. The Spanish cut bridges to prevent rebels from crossing. Rebels cut bridges to hinder Spanish military movements. Each destroyed bridge was one less reason to maintain the knowledge of how to build them. The Spanish also introduced animals that damaged the bridges. Cattle and horses, heavier than llamas and much less sure-footed, crossed with difficulty and caused accelerated wear. The bridges hadn't been designed for these larger animals, and the increased stress shortened their functional lifespans. European technology offered alternatives. By the 1600s, some of the major river crossings had been replaced with wooden bridges or stone. Bridges built by Spanish engineers using European techniques. These were seen as improvements, permanent structures that didn't require constant maintenance. That didn't sway frighteningly, that better accommodated European traffic. But these improvements came at a cost. The stone and wooden bridges required different skills masonry. Carpentry and these skills were concentrated among Spanish builders and a small number of indigenous people trained in European methods. Communities lost the autonomy they had possessed when they could maintain their own bridges using local materials and traditional knowledge. Additionally, many of the Spanish-style bridges were built in different locations, places that were easier for European engineers to work, but which required rerouting roads. Sometimes significantly, this disrupted traditional travel patterns, favored some communities over others, and further eroded the old systems in remote areas. Far from Spanish centers of power, some rope bridges continued functioning. Communities that retained their population and organization, that were not too heavily burdened by colonial extraction, that maintained their cultural continuity. These communities kept building and maintaining bridges in the traditional way. The knowledge survived, but in increasingly isolated pockets. As islands of continuity in a sea of change by the 1700s, travelers through the Andes reported that rope bridges were becoming rare. Most major crossings had been replaced with European-style structures. The rope bridges that remained were mostly in peripheral areas, crossing secondary routes, maintained by communities that either chose to preserve tradition or lacked the resources to build alternatives. The 1800s brought independence from Spain. Peru, Bolivia, Ecuador, Colombia emerged as separate nations from the wreckage of both the Inca Empire and the Spanish colonial system. The new governments, largely controlled by Creole elites of European descent, generally continued the pattern of favoring European technology and methods. Modernization became the goal. Traditional indigenous practices were viewed as backward obstacles to progress. Road building accelerated in the 19th and especially the 20th centuries. Governments sought to integrate their territories, to open remote regions to commerce and administration, to project power into areas that had remained largely autonomous. Where roads went, bridges followed, steel suspension bridges based on modern engineering principles. Concrete arches, eventually even occasional tunnels. The grass rope bridges couldn't compete. They required continuous community labor. They were temporary by design, needing annual replacement. They couldn't handle motorized vehicles. They didn't fit the paradigm of modern infrastructure, which emphasized permanence, high capacity, minimal maintenance. By the mid-20th century, the tradition was nearly extinct. Anthropologists and historians, belatedly recognizing what was being lost, began documenting the remaining bridges. Photographs from the 1940s and 1950s show bridges in various states, some still functional and well-maintained, others sagging and abandoned, placed by steel or concrete structures nearby. The knowledge faded from living memory in most places. The communities that had maintained bridges for generations lost the need as new roads and bridges bypassed them. Children grew up never having crossed a grass rope bridge, never having participated in the renewal ceremonies, never having learned the techniques of their ancestors, and yet this is where the story turns. Where despair gives way to hope, the tradition did not entirely die. In one remarkable place, against considerable odds, the knowledge survived. The practice continued. The bridges continued to be woven. But that story belongs to the next chapter. For now, as you settle deeper into rest, reflect on what it means for knowledge to be lost. Consider the countless techniques, skills, and understanding that have disappeared throughout human history. Not destroyed dramatically, but simply not passed on. The last person who knew how to do something dies. The children never learned. The knowledge vanishes as completely as if it had never existed. This is one of the quiet tragedies of history. Not the wars and disasters, but the simple failures of transmission. The moments when chains of knowledge break and traditions end. We live surrounded by the absence of lost knowledge. Ignorant of what we don't know, we've forgotten. But sometimes, rarely, preciously knowledge survives. Someone remembers. Someone teaches. Someone insists that the old ways matter, that they're worth preserving. They contain something essential even in a changed world as sleep takes you. Hold that thought. The fade is not always forever. The end is not always final. And sometimes, impossibly, threads that seemed broken remain connected, carrying forward skills and memories and meanings that refuse to disappear, that persist in the hands of people who understand that some things are too valuable to let vanish. There is still one bridge, one place where the tradition never stopped. One community, actually 4 communities, working together that maintained the knowledge through conquest, through colonization, through centuries of pressure to abandon old ways and adopt new ones. One bridge that is still rebuilt every year, exactly as it has been for over 500 years, possibly longer. In English, the name means roughly grass bridge, which is both perfectly descriptive and entirely insufficient. Cuswachaca is not just a bridge. It's a living connection to the Inca past, a UNESCO World Heritage Site, a ceremony, a community touchstone, a declaration that some traditions are worth preserving even when, especially when, the rest of the world has moved on. The bridge spans the Apurimac River in the Cusco region of Peru. About 60 miles from the city of Cusco itself, the location is remote, high in the mountains, accessible by rough dirt roads that become nearly impassable during the rainy season. There are no cities nearby, no major tourist infrastructure. The communities that maintain the bridge in Chiri, Shopibanda, Kalanaquihu, and Pelquero were small. Traditional Quechua-speaking villages where most people still farm and herd, much as their ancestors did centuries ago. The bridge crosses a particularly dramatic section of the river. The canyon walls rise steeply on both sides, and the Apurimac, living up to its name as the Great Speaker, roars through the gorge far below. From the bridge, the river looks impossibly distant, a ribbon of white water that seems more like a memory of water than the real thing. But the sound, that constant roar, reminds you of its presence, its power, its indifference to human concerns. The bridge is approximately 90 feet. It's long and about 3 feet wide, large enough for people to cross. Large enough to feel substantial, but not so large as to dwarf the landscape. It hangs in a graceful curve, the sag in the middle, creating the characteristic profile of all suspension bridges. The grass rope from which it's woven is golden brown, the color of dried ichu, and in certain light, it almost glows. This living thread stretched across stone and water once. Cuswachaca was just one bridge among hundreds. It was part of the main road from Cusco toward the south. It carried regular traffic official messengers, traders, families traveling between villages. It was important but not unique. What makes it unique now is simply that it survived. Or rather, that the communities maintained it year after year when all the other bridges were replaced or abandoned. Why? Why did these 4 communities continue the tradition when it would have been easier to accept a modern bridge, to let the old knowledge fade, to join the rest of the world in moving forward? The answer is complex, woven from multiple threads. Partly, it's about identity. The people of these communities are proudly Quechua, proudly indigenous, proudly connected to Inca heritage. The bridge is physical proof of that connection, a tangible link to ancestors, a declaration that they are not just remnants of a dead civilization, but living continuations of a vital tradition. Partly, it's about community cohesion. The annual renewal ceremony brings the 4 villages together in collaborative work. It reinforces relationships, allows young people from different communities to meet, provides opportunity for celebration and shared identity. The bridge is not just infrastructure. It's a reason to gather, a focal point for community life. Partly, it's spiritual. The communities maintain Andean religious practices sometimes syncretized with Catholic elements, but still fundamentally rooted in the old world view of Apis and Pachamama and sacred landscape. The bridge is sacred. To allow it to fade would be spiritual abandonment, breaking of covenant with the spirits and the ancestors. And partly, perhaps, most importantly, it's about skill and pride. These communities possess knowledge that almost no one else has. They can do something remarkable, something their grandparents and great-grandparents and ancestors stretching back centuries could do. That knowledge is precious. It's worth preserving not because it's useful in practical terms. There are modern bridges nearby that carry vehicle traffic, but because it's theirs, because it's part of who they are, because letting it disappear would diminish them. The renewal happens in June. During the dry season, timed to coincide with the Inti Raymi festival, the Festival of the Sun, the major Inca celebration that has been revived in modern times. The specific date is chosen through community consensus, with attention to weather forecasts, agricultural cycles, and coordination with other village activities. Preparation begins weeks in advance. The communities harvest ichu from high slopes, each family contributing a portion. The grass is dried and brought to staging areas. The elders, the people who remember how previous renewals were done, who can judge rope quality by touch and eye inspect the materials, approve or reject offerings, provide guidance. As the renewal date approaches, people begin gathering. Families travel from the 4 villages, bringing food, bringing their contributions of prepared grass rope, bringing children who will watch and learn and someday lead these ceremonies themselves. There is excitement, anticipation. This is the major event of the year. It's a time when the community comes together for shared purpose. The ceremony begins with offerings to Pachamama and the Apis. The communities dig small pits near the bridge anchor points and fill them with coca leaves, chicha, sometimes other items, small loaves of bread, flower petals, symbolic objects. Prayers are spoken in Quitua, asking for protection, asking for the bridge to be strong, asking for another year of safe crossings. This is not Christian prayer, though some participants are Catholic. This is older, directed toward spirits of place, toward the living earth. Then the work begins. The old bridge is dismantled, its sections lowered carefully or pulled back to shore. The grass, after a year of service, is weathered and worn, but it's still treated with respect. It's coiled neatly, set aside, will later be burned or buried with gratitude for its service. The anchor points are inspected and repaired if necessary. These are massive stone structures, some of them original Inca construction, some rebuilt or reinforced over the centuries. They're set deep into the bedrock, immovable. The foundation on which everything else depends. Then comes the stretching of the main cables. Teams form on both sides of the canyon. The massive cables woven over the previous weeks from hundreds of smaller ropes are prepared for crossing. A lighter line is sent across first, sometimes by throwing it with weights attached, sometimes by having someone carry it across the remnants of the old bridge before it's fully dismantled. This lighter line pulls heavier ropes, and the heavier ropes pull the main cables. The teams pull in coordination, chanting work songs, timing their efforts to the rhythm of drums and the calls of the leaders. It's exhausting work. The cables are heavy, and the friction against stone and the weight of rope hanging in the canyon require enormous collective force. But gradually, the cable moves. Inch by inch, foot by foot, it crosses the canyon. When the far end is finally secured to the anchor point, a cheer goes up. The most difficult part is accomplished. The bridge has its spine. The second main cable follows. Then the handrails. Then begins the patient work of weaving the floor of the mat of smaller ropes that will bear the weight of travelers. This work requires precision, requires experienced hands, requires attention to tension and spacing, and the way different cords interlock. Throughout all of this, there is celebration. Breaks for food, large communal meals with traditional dishes. Breaks for chicha, shared freely, poured first as offerings, then consumed to fuel continued work. Music, constantly traditional instruments, traditional songs, some dating back centuries. dancing during rest periods, particularly in the evenings when the day's major tasks are complete. But people are not yet ready to sleep. Children run everywhere, playing games, watching the adults work, sometimes helping with small tasks. This is their education and tradition, their connection to heritage. Years from now, when they're the adults leading the renewal, they'll remember these days, the excitement, the community, the satisfaction of work done together after 2 or 3 days, depending on weather, on how smoothly the work goes, on a dozen variables. The new bridge is complete. It hangs fresh and strong across the canyon. Golden brown grass rope, bright against dark stone, a curve suspended in space. A physical manifestation of community, will, and inherited knowledge. The first crossing is ceremonial. A community leader, often one of the elders whose wisdom has guided the renewal, walks across slowly, deliberately. Sometimes they carry offerings, sometimes they simply cross in prayer. This first crossing blesses the bridge, sanctifies it, marks the transition from construction to use. Then others cross, testing the bridge, confirming its strength, celebrating its completion. People walk back and forth, sometimes running, sometimes deliberately jumping to test the bounce and sway. This is quality control, but it's also joy. The bridge is done. The tradition continues. For another year, Kuzwa spans the canyon, carries travelers, connects communities, links present to past. In recent decades, Kuzwa has gained international attention. Tourists come to witness the renewal ceremony. Researchers come to document the techniques. Film crews come to record the process for documentaries. UNESCO designated the bridge and its renewal tradition as intangible cultural heritage of humanity, recognizing its significance as living tradition. As knowledge that deserves support and protection, this attention is both blessing and complication. It brings resources, some funding for the community's recognition that helps protect the tradition. But it also brings pressure to perform for audiences, to maintain authenticity while accommodating visitors. To balance tradition with tourism, the communities have largely navigated this well. They welcome respectful visitors, but maintain control of the ceremony. It's not a show for tourists. It's a real working ritual that outsiders are permitted to witness. The schedule is not adjusted for tourist convenience. The work is not simplified or made more photogenic. The tradition continues on its own terms, and the bridge still functions. Though there are modern bridges nearby, some locals still cross Kuzwa regularly. It's the shorter route between certain villages. It's familiar. It's theirs. Walking across it is not just transportation, but connection to place, to heritage, to community, to the chain of ancestors who crossed here before. Standing at Keswachaka, and if you ever have the opportunity, you should make the pilgrimage to this remote canyon. Should witness with your own eyes this impossible survival standing there, you feel time collapse. The bridge looks like it could have 500 years ago. The techniques are identical. The materials are the same. The landscape is unchanged. For a moment, the centuries fall away, and you're standing in the Inca Empire watching a routine maintenance ritual, witnessing something that was once commonplace, but which now feels miraculous. Kuzwa is defiance. It defies colonialism, which tried to erase indigenous knowledge. It defies modernization, which declared traditional methods obsolete. It defies forgetting, which claimed so many other traditions. It defies time itself, maintaining continuity across centuries that saw empires rise and fall. Technologies transform, worlds collide and merge. It is also hope. Hope that some things can survive, that knowledge can be preserved, that communities can maintain identity and tradition even in the face of overwhelming pressure to conform, to assimilate, to abandon the old ways. And it is beauty. Simple, profound beauty. Grass woven into rope. Rope woven into bridge. Bridge woven into landscape, into community, into the fabric of human culture. Beauty not in decoration, but in function, in adaptation, in the way human skill and natural materials come together to solve problems, to connect, to enable life in impossible places as you drift toward deepest sleep. Let Kuzwa Chaka be your last waking thought. Picture the bridge hanging in space, golden against the dark canyon. Picture the communities gathering for renewal. It's the oldest teaching the youngest, the tradition passing forward one more year. Picture travelers, crossing tourists with cameras, local villagers with loads, children on their way to school and the next village, all of them. Trusting grass and skill and 5 centuries of unbroken knowledge, the bridge holds. The tradition continues. And somewhere in the mountains, grass grows on high slopes, waiting for harvest. Waiting to become the bridge that will connect next year's travelers, that will carry forward the knowledge, that will prove once again that what seems impossible, spanning chasms with grass, maintaining traditions across centuries, keeping ancient knowledge alive in the modern world, is not impossible at all. Just difficult. Just demanding. Just worth doing. ... In the beginning there was grass. Simple mountain grass, growing on remote slopes where the air is thin and cold, where few humans venture except to harvest. Unremarkable grass. The kind you might walk past without noticing. The kind that seems to exist simply as part of the landscape, fulfilling no particular purpose except to grow, to photosynthesize, to reproduce, to persist. But humans looked at this grass and saw a possibility. They saw not what it was, but what it could become. They saw strength hiding in thin fibers, saw connection hiding in scattered stalks, saw bridges waiting to be woven from nothing more than patient hands and accumulated knowledge. This is the essence of human civilization, really. Not the grand monuments or the written texts or the technologies that dominate our imagination when we think of history. Those are just the most visible expressions. The essence is simpler. The willingness to look at the world and imagine it differently. To see possibility where none seems to exist. To believe that impossible problems have solutions, that impossible gaps can be crossed, that impossible knowledge can be mastered. The Inca looked at canyons that should have ended travel and imagined roads continuing. They looked at rivers that should have been barriers and imagined crossings. They looked at mountains that should have separated peoples and imagined an empire, unified across the most difficult terrain on Earth. And then, impossibly, they made it real. But they didn't do it through genius alone. They didn't do it through technology. They did it through something harder, something less celebrated. Something that doesn't fit easily into dramatic narratives. Patient, communal, continuous work. They did it by organizing thousands of people to harvest grass, to twist fibers, to weave ropes, to build bridges, to maintain those bridges year after year, generation after generation, never stopping, never assuming the work was done. The bridges were not built. They were maintained. That's the crucial distinction. A bridge built once and then ignored would have failed within months. The bridges that allowed the empire to function were bridges that communities tended constantly, that received ongoing attention, that were renewed every single year. The bridges were not objects but processes. Not things but practices. Not monuments but traditions. This requires a different kind of thinking about achievement. We moderns tend to celebrate the moment of creation, the invention, the discovery, the breakthrough. We focus on the brilliant individual, the genius who sees what no one else sees. We write biographies of inventors and discoverers. We give Nobel Prizes. We name buildings and awards after people who had singular great ideas. But the rope bridges were not built by singular great ideas. They were built by accumulated wisdom, by knowledge refined through generations, by communities of practice where skill was distributed among many people rather than concentrated in a few. No individual weaver could have built a bridge alone. No single generation could have maintained the tradition. It required collective effort sustained across time. This is harder to celebrate because it's harder to narrate. There are no heroes, no dramatic moments of individual triumph. There are only communities working together, elders teaching youth, traditions continuing. It's quiet. It's undramatic. It's the opposite of what makes good storytelling in conventional terms, and yet it's profound. The bridges, these impossible bridges, woven from grass, spanning chasms. connecting an empire were only possible because of this quiet, continuous, collective devotion. The brilliance was not in any one person or one moment, but in the system. In the social organization that allowed knowledge to be preserved and transmitted, in the cultural values that made people willing to contribute labor to maintain, structures they individually didn't own but collectively depended on. When we think about what is lost, when traditions die, when we mourn the disappearance of almost all the rope, bridges were mourning more than physical structures. We're mourning knowledge, yes. But we're also mourning ways of organizing human effort, ways of relating to landscape, ways of thinking about infrastructure and community responsibility. We're mourning worldviews that understood connection as something requiring constant maintenance rather than something achieved once and then ignored. Modern bridges are built to be permanent. This is generally considered an advance. Why would we want to rebuild bridges every year when we can build once and forget about it? Why maintain traditions that are labor-intensive when we have technologies that are more efficient? These are reasonable questions, but they miss something. The yearly renewal of the rope bridges was not just about maintaining physical infrastructure. It was about maintaining social infrastructure. It brought communities together. It transmitted knowledge. It created occasions for ceremony, for celebration, for connection. It wove the social fabric as surely as it wove the bridge itself. When we replace a rope bridge that requires community renewal with a steel bridge that requires only occasional professional inspection, we gain efficiency, but we lose the community practices that the old bridge necessitated. We solve the transportation problem, but abandon the social benefits that came with solving it in the traditional way. This is not an argument against progress or modern technology. Steel bridges are undeniably superior in many practical ways. But it is an argument for recognizing what is lost, for understanding that traditional technologies often served multiple purposes, and that when we replace them, we should be conscious of all the things we're replacing. Not just the most obvious ones. Kuzuchaka survives partly because it's no longer necessary as transportation infrastructure. There are modern bridges nearby. No one depends on the grass bridge for essential travel. This frees it to serve other purposes: cultural continuity, community identity, living connection to heritage. It can be maintained because people choose to maintain it, not because they must. And that choice, that decision to invest labor in preserving tradition, even when more efficient alternatives exist, that is its own form of wisdom. We live in an age that tends to view the past as inferior, as something we've progressed beyond. We celebrate innovation and disruption. We assume newer is better, but the rope bridges suggest a different perspective. Sometimes ancient knowledge contains solutions we've forgotten. Sometimes traditional practices embed wisdoms that aren't immediately obvious. Sometimes what looks primitive or inefficient serves purposes we don't initially recognize. The weavers were not primitive engineers who didn't know better. They were sophisticated practitioners of a complex craft, working with materials perfectly suited to their environment, creating structures that functioned reliably for centuries. Their methods were not inferior to modern engineering. They were different, optimized for different constraints, serving different needs, and their work was beautiful. Not aesthetically beautiful in the way we usually mean, though the bridges were, in fact, visually striking, but beautiful in a deeper sense. Beautiful in the way that skillful work is always beautiful. Beautiful in the integration of human intelligence with natural materials. Beautiful in the way they solved impossible problems with simple means. Beautiful in their honesty. They didn't pretend to be permanent, didn't deny their need for maintenance, didn't hide their dependence on continuous community effort. As you drift into final sleep, let yourself feel what it might mean to live in a world where connection is understood as something requiring effort, where bridges don't just exist but must be woven, where maintenance is not an annoyance but a central practice, where community comes together not because it's forced to, but because collective work produces results no individual could achieve. Imagine your own life as a bridge, not something built once and then finished, but something requiring constant attention, continuous renewal, regular rebuilding. The threads that connect you to others, family, friends, community, These are not permanent structures, but living relationships that need tending. They fray, they stretch, they require maintenance. The weavers understood this. Every year they gathered to rebuild the bridge, not because the old one had catastrophically failed, but because they understood that connections require renewal, that nothing lasts without effort, that the price of continued connection is continued work. This is wisdom we need. In our age of social fragmentation, of declining community participation, of relationships maintained through digital means that feel strangely hollow, we might learn from people who understood that real connection requires physically gathering, working together, weaving and reweaving the bonds that hold us together. The grass bridges are mostly gone. The empire that built them is 500 years dead. The world has changed in ways the Inca could never have imagined. And yet Kuzwachaka persists. Communities still gather. The grass is still woven. The bridge still hangs across the canyon, golden and impossible. A living thread connecting past to present to future. This is what survives, not empires. Not rulers, not the grand and the powerful. What survives is work, community, tradition, knowledge passed hand to hand, generation to generation. What survives is the willingness of ordinary people to maintain connections, to preserve knowledge, to do the patient, continuous work that holds the world together. You are drifting now, deeply asleep, thoughts dissolving into dreams. But somewhere in your sleeping mind, a bridge hangs in space, woven from nothing more than grass and skill and time, connecting impossible distances, held aloft by hands you'll never see, by people whose names are lost, whose lives were quiet and ordinary, but whose work was essential, whose legacy is this, that connections are possible. That community effort overcomes individual limitation. That patient work transforms impossible obstacles into crossings that carry life forward. The river roars far below. The wind moves through the canyon. And the bridge woven from grass, woven from tradition, woven from 500 years of unbroken knowledge, sways gently and holds. Sleep now. Cross the bridge in your dreams. Feel the rope under your hands, rough and real and strong. Trust the weavers, living and dead, whose work supports you. And know, as you drift through the darkness toward morning, that you are held by threads you cannot see, woven by hands that came before, maintained by efforts that continue, connecting you to a human story that stretches back through centuries and forward, into all the futures still to come. The bridge holds. The tradition continues. The threads bind time itself.